Hey everybody, it's Robeson back again for History of the Modern World Part 2. Going to get right into it. Where we left off was a discussion of piracy. And so in Part 2, what we find is we transition after the death of Henry VIII. There's a little bit of a disruption period for a couple of years as different players before Elizabeth are head of state. But in the 1558, Elizabeth the First becomes the monarch for England, and it coincides with the peak of Spanish power and influence in the world, and the peak of British piracy and plunder, to the point where the great naval action heroes of the day, Sir Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, folks of those nature, have become so wealthy from what they've done that they've gained respectability on the land. And so you see these people eventually become knighted, and now they are in partnership with the crown, who in many cases are making less money on their own devices from their own taxes and different levies and fees than these merchants are going out and plundering in the world. And so this is kind of the formation, the beginning stages of the formation of the British Empire, where these individuals of certain scruples, of certain aggression, are able to make money illicitly, either through plunder or other types of illicit activities, but are also backed by the government of England, which becomes what we essentially know as the British Empire. So Elizabeth first, she was monarch from 1558 to 1603. Uh, and her most famous triumph was the victory over the Spanish in the War of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Now, Spain at this time is sore with England because obviously Ferdinand and Isabella's daughter Catherine was the wife, the first wife of Henry VIII, and he discarded her, and so that was an insult. And so England and Spain basically have been circling around each other at this point, because Henry VIII not only discarded Catherine, but he created his own church, the Church of England, which stood as a rival to the Catholic Church, and created a huge amount of turmoil within England, going back and forth between which, depending on the succession laws, which potential monarch would be Catholic, which potential monarch would be Anglican. So by 1580s, the Spanish are furious with the British, with the British or English for with a hidden hand supporting this pilfering and plundering of their Spanish ships, and they decide to come after it. Now, the one advantage of what Sir Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh and George Grenville and Humphrey Gilbert and others had done is they had been basically at war in various forms, in small scale warfare, in the Caribbean for years by this point. And so their form of naval ability was very nimble and quick, and they were able to kind of move through the larger Spanish ships and outmaneuver them and defeat them in a pretty stunning fashion. And that's really the beginning of the end of the Spanish Empire as we speak, and really the rise of England as and the British Empire as the dominant power in the world. And it takes place and continues over the next 100 years or so. But this is really the 1588 Spanish Armada War is really the turning point where everything starts to flow pretty quickly into the British direction. So this is a segue into the beginning of the 17th century and the 1600s. Now we go through, this is really where the modern world that we currently live in starts to really come into shape. And what is the key factor of this time period? It is that James, he was the King of Scotland. He was the son of Mary, Queen of the Scots. He, through succession, becomes, after Elizabeth dies in 1603, he becomes king James the First of England, and he combines the two nations, and that is how you get Great Britain. And then right behind that, uh, not long after, um, we see some of the Scottish practices start to come into play in the British expansion efforts. So, what are the Scottish practices that I'm talking about? See where the connection will be. So, in 1606, so just after James first became King of England, there was a law passed in Scotland called the Colliers and Salters Act, which these are Colliers are coal miners, and it made that if their landlord, those people who worked on that land, they were given wages. So that's another invention, the Scottish wage labor. We'll get back to that in the next chapter, when we talk about labor, free labor, and slave labor, and the differences between the two and the similarities between the two. But so the Colliers and Salters Act in 1606 bound those workers to their landlord in a hereditary fashion. That means their children, those colliers, those coal miners, their children were bound to uh, that landlord into the future. So this is where American hereditary slavery comes from. Scotland, 1606, Colliers and Salters Act. Okay, and it goes through, over time it goes through different versions of how they do how they implemented in different areas. But this act was so prevalent and dominant that it was abolished in 1799. So that is almost almost 200 years that it existed. And this is in Scotland. So imagine, they were able to bring that system over to places like Barbados, and then from Barbados, you're able to bring that concept, a fully formed concept of plantation slavery, to the American colonies in the late 1600s, early 1700s. Okay, so really interesting period of time. So much going on. And Scotland, is also the home of Adam Smith. Adam Smith is the writer of the preeminent book on economics of this time period, The Wealth of Nations. And there are other prominent Scottish scholars as well, economics or economists, who were setting the business framework which we now continue to live under to this day. And so, from this Colliers and Salters Act, from the initiatives that King James had put in place, we start to see the exploration of other territories. And this is where you really see the expansion of the English into the New World, into the what came to be the American colonies. And folks like Sir Francis Drake, who we talked about before, Walter Raleigh, who we came before, they become very wealthy through illicit means. They now become investors in the British expansion into these territories. So now we're looking at the Virginia colony, the North Carolina Roanoke colony, which was listed, which was attempted prior to Jamestown, and other colonies like that being erected for the purposes of plantation, building crops, but those take time, but also as nests for other businesses like piracy to be conducted, or other illicit industries to be conducted. And so we see the British Empire expand through criminality, this merging of criminality, opportunities to extract resources, and also with governmental support. And this is where the culminates in the formation of the first multinational corporation, which is the British East India Company in 1600. So the Virginia Company, the colony of Jamestown, the colony of Virginia, um, was actually a multinational corporation that had investors. So the Virginia Company is the Virginia colony, and so when they came over, there was investors who were expecting a return, and uh, what was expected was that they build a place, a stable location, and grow from there, and that those investors would get a return on their investment at some point in relatively short order. And so, Hudson Bay Colony, which is the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is Plymouth Rock, all of the colonies that start to pop up, they're not like just political refugees in some cases or anything else like that. These are funded multinational corporations, joint stock corporations they were called, who put money together and collected people and sent them out there, indentured servants, then eventually later African slaves, and others, and indentured Irish and things like that, to help build that land. So this is really the beginning of the world that we come to live in today. And what's ironic about it is the British have their hands on everything. Everything that we get blamed for in America, particularly our history, almost all of it comes from the British, and were instituted by the British, implemented by the British, and monitored and administered by them. So this is kind of leading into the next phase, what we talk about in part three, which is this transition with America developing itself as a specific entity, different or distinct from England.